Thank you.
You're live.
Thank you. Take it away, Nicole.
There we are. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to see so many faces joining us, including in council chambers. Welcome, your worship. All right. So welcome, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'll admit with my iPad, I do not have the agenda in front of me. So either if someone could share their screen with that, or I can probably pull it up on my phone device as well. Here. Agenda. Perfect. I got her. Oh, no, I do not. My apologies. The security settings on my phone do not allow me to do so. So I'm not sure if Amanda, if either you or Jaylene could put the agenda up on the screen for us just to get us started. The joys of doing things on the road. I'm grateful to be joining you from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, visiting some family after the conference. And just spent the last 3.5 hours wandering the Canadian Museum of Human Rights with my mother-in-law. It was fantastic. Eye-opening, absolutely eye-opening. There's so many things that we learn and so many things that we don't. Not seeing an agenda popping up. I think I can minimize you guys and pull it up here as well. I just won't be able to see everyone the same. Because I believe our first things are going to be adoption of the agenda. There we go. If I can get a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda, please. I can, Mark and Melissa Jameson, thank you. All in favor? Approved, thank you. And next, likely adoption of the minutes. If I can get a mover and a seconder for the minutes, if everyone had time to review. I got Kathy English and Mark McKee, thank you kindly. And hopefully everyone had a chance to review through. Thank you very much for the way you laid them out, Amanda. It did help make it easier to understand some of the conversations we were having and the decisions made at the time. Wonderful, thank you kindly. And so, oh, of course, now I'm not gonna be able to see all of the participants. Oh, the joys. This is where we were talking about what gear does council need for next year. And if you're doing meetings virtually, it's fun to get around. So if anyone is opposed to adoption of the minute or has any additions or edits to make, please speak up. I will not be able to see your hands. And Fraser's offering to share on his as well there. All right, so Gary, Your Worship, I may ask you if you can see all of the faces there. If you see any voices that I need to consider, please do bring them to my attention if you could. Otherwise, we will move on to business arising from the minutes. So we did add an amendment there to include the member list to include BC Transit. Scott, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it. We know transit using Grizzly Plaza is an important part of the space, so I'm grateful to have you here. And if anyone does have any comments they would like to speak to, I will be keeping my eye on the chat box as well. You are welcome to drop a comment in there. Otherwise, we will move on to old business, which is reviewing some design options from Selkirk Planning. And just before we get to that, I would like to say a few words, if that's all right. Mostly around, it's been brought to my attention that there has been an article printed in the Revelstoke Mountaineer about these concepts. I'll admit I have not read it myself, nor did I get a chance to speak with Mr. Orlando since our last chat, when we did an interview about our last meeting. And I just would like to extend an offer that I am happy to do as many interviews and conversations as are desired. This is important to me as well. And it's important that we keep an open conversation as we move through these concepts and these ideas. I recognize that this is the heart of our community, and it's great to see so many people engaged and wanting to be part of that conversation. But it is important to recognize that we are still in the design and idea concept. The conversation today, I hope, sticks around the priorities of the community and the steering committee we've brought together. These are some big, bold ideas that I'm so grateful to you, Fraser and Jason, for bringing these forward for us to discuss. There's some exciting ideas in there, and this is where we get to talk about those. It's hard to talk about big ideas sometimes, and this is really important. The phasing or any financial considerations will be looked at after this. And I believe if Steve or Mr. Black, if you would like to speak a little bit to the consideration of this water pipe that we are now aware of from before the Depression. And just what the realities and constraints are and the opportunities around upgrading our infrastructure and what that means for the actual work. Oh, Chambers is on mute, so we cannot hear you if you're speaking. If we can, oh, Steve, just if I could. In the meeting room, you guys are still on mute. All right, well, I can speak to it to a certain extent, that's all right. From what I understand, that there is an option to install a water pipe down the center of the street and not having to go underneath and replace that existing pipe. We can just abandon it in place. Oh, there we are.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. I'm sorry, technical difficulties.
Totally fine.
It's just Gary and Michelle. We're now unmuted.
So we are, yeah, so the infrastructure in the ground is very old, and yes, we are considering replacing it as a part of this project. Obviously, we don't want to build something on the surface, then immediately have to go in and dig up the whole area again to replace pipe. So we are currently having design being completed for replacing the water main in Grizzly Plaza, which goes underneath the gazebo. We'll abandon that pipe in place and then put a new pipe in wherever we can that does not cause any conflicts. So that will be a separate budget, and we're doing that design work now so that should we be doing some surface works next year, we can get this water main replaced prior to any surface improvements going on. So utilities we can take off the table. We'll address that internally as a part of our operations.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Black. I appreciate that. So as we go through these design concepts, I do want to capture any that really capture the ideas of the group, as well as not being held to any constraints. Now I see a chat from Megan Taber. If there's a way to have a utilities corridor put in that is serviceable and future-proofing utilities. And I'm assuming that will be part of that proposal and that budget put together, Mr. Black?
Correct. Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you for confirming that. All right, well, with that comment, I would like to pass it on to Fraser and Jason to walk us through these ideas. Just make sure we can get you off mute.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending. Jason and I are happy to be here to present, again, the initial design concepts. I know there are some big ideas in there, probably a bit broader discussion beyond Grizzly Plaza, but we just felt that it was important to at least discuss. And, you know, if the ideas end here, that's totally fine. We just felt it was a good time now while we're looking at things to bring some of these big ideas in. So, and thanks, Steve, as well for clarifying. I may have misinterpreted your email when you said replace the water line. I thought that meant it would have to come out. So if it's abandoned, that kind of frees up the second option a bit more to not impact some of the things currently in the plaza. If I can, I'm going to share my screen. And just run through kind of the overview of the concepts. I'm assuming everyone can see here. Yeah, okay. So this was just, again, a bit of an understanding about the water main running underneath, the fact that it was due for replacement. So I think this is less of a constraint now with Steve's clarification there. Oh, is someone trying to ask a question? I don't have access to the chat here. So Nicole, you'll have to interrupt me if there's questions. Okay, so the first concept we're calling balanced with infill. So essentially the road is centered within the right of way down the middle. So everything's kind of balanced on either side. There's more trees in this concept, as well as we've relocated the gazebo / band shell to the southern end of the plaza. I'll get into some of the details here. So as mentioned, as discussed earlier, we would be leveling the road so that it's at grade with the sidewalk, and there'd be a ramp up from First Street as well as Victoria into the plaza. New gazebo location down on the south end. Again, just to get it away from that noise. The clock that's there, everyone seemed to like that one, and so we're keeping where it is. We've looked at trying to locate a new bus stop location. I know if the discussion we had last time was that the plaza would be closed for longer periods of time, but not permanently. So it might be closed for, let's say, the summer months for Street Fest, or something like that. So we did want to think about where the best spot for the bus stop location is, and I'm sure Scott will have some comments on that. We also noticed with the previous design that there was this radial pattern paving that was really kind of reflected the shape of the gazebo. And we, again, discussed this as a committee, and it was felt that continuing that radial pattern of paving and referencing the shape of the gazebo was something that people would like to see remain. We have redesigned the planters here and integrated it with seating. So a bit similar to what you see on Mackenzie, kind of between first and second. So there's some cutouts for seating, as well as cutouts for the existing trees. So, if we're trying to keep those trees, we're kind of making room for those. This concept has kind of a new, more modern bench. There's kind of two themes to each of these. Again, we can mix and match or choose what we like from each for the final concept. We also wanted to look at some dark sky friendly street lighting, so not casting light up. And this is really important both for human health and environmental health, just avoiding light pollution wherever possible. We also talked about realigning the sidewalk along Victoria so that as you're walking along the sidewalk, you've got some protection from the heavy traffic there. And so putting the boulevard on the roadside would provide a bit of a buffer there and just improve the overall pedestrian experience when walking into the plaza. You'll notice there's those corner planters just next to the bears on both sides. We've removed those partly because it just seemed like it really funneled people around it rather than drawing people in. And we've tried to integrate some potential stormwater features within the boulevard there. Probably the big idea that you can see on this concept is the idea of having infill buildings on the existing parking. And again, this was really targeted just at this idea of noise, which we talked a lot about in the plaza, and how to reduce the impact of noise within the plaza. So, trees are nice, but they're not going to cut the noise like a building would. So again, we'll discuss that in a bit further detail. The grizzly statues to remain. As I mentioned, more street trees here to provide shade for seating. Again, was something that that people wanted to see. We've included the garbage and recycling facilities with a bit of a wrap around the bear-proof garbage and recycling, as well, trying to retain the existing street trees. And then down towards the gazebo. So the idea here is that Street Fest would continue in the gazebo. We've tried to leave this area kind of free of planters just to allow for seating. So we didn't want to crowd it with more raised planters there because this would be kind of the main seating area. And that is everything from this concept. Oh, sorry, we've got a spot for new bear inspired art. And again, don't focus on the red bears, but just focus on the idea of having new art there, as well as the kiosk with information. So right when you come into the plaza, there's information there. The second here's some images of what it might look like. And the second concept is kind of a combination of a performance space and a meeting space. So the main thing is the gazebo stays where it is, and there's a stage developed specifically for Street Fest and other events in the plaza. And this idea really came from a comment from one of the steering committee members that said, the gazebo wasn't really designed to be a performance space. It was more to be a meeting space. And so we want, with that in mind, we wanted to look at designing something specific for a performance space and kind of leaving the gazebo to kind of go back to what it was originally intended to be, which is more of a meeting space. So kind of key components, again, retaining the existing street trees, replacing some of those tree grates. You also notice in both concepts around the trees and the tree grates, we've put concrete in, again, to just make it a bit more accessible, especially around benches. So, the tree roots want to kind of push up the pavement and the blocks in certain places, and it makes it really hard for, just people with mobility issues to access the benches and seating. So having concrete there is a bit more of an even surface to hopefully make that a bit more friendly for them. Smaller planters on this end, on the south end at the entrance, again, new bear art statues. So in this concept, the road is set slightly further kind of southeast, I guess. And this is to make space for the gazebo. Keep the straight road alignment, but you would find, more of a flat paved space on kind of the northwest end of the plaza. Again, the road would be set to grade. The clock would remain, bus stop would be in the same location. Another, I guess, big idea is this concept of a stage that can kind of slide in and out of place. So again, it would act as a barrier during street closure for, say, Street Fest or something like that. We could talk a bit about that when we get into the details, but the idea is that it can just be moved on a track. I've tried to think about snow removal too, so not having a straight horizontal track, which is why you'll notice this is angled slightly. So when the plow comes in, it doesn't smack it bang on. These would be recessed, but there might still be an opportunity to kind of catch the plow edge if it was a straight kind of track directly across. So it kind of slides on an angle. Again, some more of those new planters with integrated seating, the new lighting, which we talked about. So in this concept, there's no building infill on the parking lot. But the parking layout has been revised a little bit, and we've got space dedicated for food trucks. And I think we've looked at that both parking areas, and they seem like they need a resurfacing and repainting. So that would all happen at once. And then again, integrating some stormwater features on the edge, again, to speak about our climate, our environment a bit more, with kind of through connections through from the parking area to the plaza. So right now there's a kind of two fences on either side that really restrict where you enter into the plaza. So this would allow just a bit more free flow into that. Again, we've redesigned the sidewalk here and created that buffer along Victoria to create that feeling of safety. Smaller planters on the north end. Again, the grizzly statues remain. The gazebo can stay in the same place if we're just abandoning that water line. And as mentioned, the parking areas would be improved, continue that radial paving pattern. And, we'll get into the details of what some of those benches may or may not look like, but that's a pretty brief overview of both concepts. Again, some images. As far as landscaping goes, we just imagine we would use a similar landscaping in the planters. It might be updated a little bit, but I think everyone really appreciates those flowers really early on. The crocus is coming up, and just the color and vibrancy of those throughout the year. So there wouldn't be any major changes there. So again, some images of concept 2. So do we want to talk overall about the concepts, or should I just go through the details and come back? Do you have a preference, Nicole? Might be easier to go through everything, and then I can take notes while people are talking.
Absolutely. I think I've been kind of writing down some notes of some of these ideas. I think they do align very well with what you have for your slides. And I think having the images up like this to discuss each individual component, I think discussing each individual component one at a time as a group is going to be more effective than one at a time and bouncing between ideas. So I would be happy to start with that, with starting as you've designed here. And then when we get to the end, if there's any topics we haven't addressed, we can go through that as well. I did receive comment from the Chamber of Commerce as well around some feedback on some of these. So I can either read out that email at the start or at the end. I don't think I want to jump through the various topics and try to juggle that many things. So maybe what I'll do, it's relatively short, so I may just jump in and read those comments out to get us started a little bit. And then we can start unmuting some of our participants to discuss some of these different ideas. But thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciate it.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to flip back to the concepts then while you're
Okay.
reading.
All right,
Um,
great.
go
So
ahead.
this is from Stacy and Maggie from the Chamber of Commerce. They are currently in Prince George for the BC Chamber of Commerce. So shout out to those ladies representing Revelstoke. I can appreciate the busyness of a conference. It keeps you going. So the following step pieces. So one, she generally prefers the second design concept option over the first. Both of them felt very strongly about the message on the garbage can wraps, rather than mentioning the sad story of what happened back in 2016, rather focusing on the way forward and being inspiring. So really trying to tell that story of why we have bear-proof garbage bins and inspiring people to pay more attention. I think art's a great way to do that. So I think that's a great comment. She strongly does not support straddling the plaza with new buildings. She does support additional parking structures being considered, combined with messaging to encourage biking or walking when possible. For the streetlight design, she prefers options 1 or 2, not the modern look. And just commenting that the community feedback has reflected a very strong desire to maintain that heritage feel. And the follow-up from Maggie was adding out the note around the bear, that it seems to have, and I've seen this in my work as well, that the story through inspiration seems to land more effectively rather than through guilt trips and death. And it will, at some point, it will be outdated. So being able to tell a story of why we are so passionate about being bear smart in the community, especially as we move forward with our new composting program. I think that'll be a great conversation that we could look at implementing myself. But anyways, that was the comment we received back from the Chamber of Commerce. And so that was, like you're showing here, more focused on the concept number 2. So without being able to see everyone, I appreciate virtual meetings because it's really nice to be able to see the screens and see the images really nicely. But it is nice to see body language sometimes as well, to see where the group, because this is a group project. That's why we have the steering committee for this conversation, so that we can share ideas around where we want to go forward. So collectively, let's just see here. If you're able to move the slides to those main design concepts, just to keep us focused perhaps on one topic at a time, just to get us warmed up. And then at the end of those big picture idea slides, if we want to come back to the concepts to discuss other ideas, or as someone's speaking, if you don't mind. Yeah,
why don't we focus it on concept 1? There's a couple questions at the end, just what you like from each concept and what you don't. So I think for me, that would be easier, just to focus on concept 1 and then concept 2.
Wonderful. I'm just trying to look. I can see. Always show controls, show non-video. Just looking for a way that I can see participants better when you're sharing the screen. And Amanda, if you have any tips, I am open to it. The limitation of being on an iPad.
Check your chat, Nicole.
I did see that. So in the top right corner of your screen, there's a view button. And unfortunately,
Can you hit side-by-side gallery?
I see the camera. Does that, I don't know that I get that option on an iPad, unfortunately.
If Fraser stops sharing, can we have see everybody?
Yeah, there you all are. Thank you. My apologies. I did not bring my laptop on this trip. Just the iPad for trying to minimize my weight hauling around. All right. So now that I've shared some comments from the Chamber of Commerce, who else would like to start us off with some general feedback, as Fraser had asked? Mr. Black.
I will chime in early only in regards to the public infrastructure components.
Wonderful.
I think the groundwater and stormwater recharge options are very important for the community, that we start to put the water back in the ground instead of putting it in a pipe and sending it to the river as fast as we can. I also am very keen for us to comply with our night sky ordinances and make sure that whatever lighting we put up is compliant in the future. I also am very keen to see the planters and seeding combined. I think those are wonderful ideas. And of course, the underground infrastructure we will deal with separately, so that we don't get in the way of any of these concepts that the group finds to push forward with. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Black. And I will comment on that as well on the dark sky compliant. One of the booths I stopped by at the trade show at FCM in Regina. So to avoid acronyms, it's the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So this is the federal conference for municipal leaders. And there was some examples of what those tops could look like. And they did assure me that yes, it is very easy to apply them on top of heritage lamp posts. And that should not be a problem. LED, night sky compliant, it looks like most communities are going that route as well, which I'm grateful to hear. So thank you very much for that context to help us understand some of our constraints. And then, forgive me, I'm going to start picking folks. So Kathy English, would you mind giving us your insight? Once we get
Our participants be unmuted.
There she is.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Yeah, I think really being aware of the community feedback. I was rather alarmed to see an article in the Mountaineer that took a really negative approach and a really kind of a sensational approach to the project. And being that we were all had taken an oath of confidentiality, I didn't jump in and speak to that, but the people have very strong feelings about Grizzly Plaza. And looking at the two concepts, I really think that concept 2 is closer to what people would be comfortable with. And I think moving Grizzly Plaza would be really problematic for a lot of people. I think it would really change the nature of the space, and it would take away that branding that you see, and it would sort of take away that iconic look to the plaza. So I do prefer a lot of the elements in concept 2. I definitely like the emphasis on the trees and the planting. And I think that's one thing when I look at the space now that I think we can enhance. So looking at more plant material, making it more park-like, I think that's definitely a good move. I'm not really in favor of changing all the color schemes to black. Like painting the clock. I think those splashes of color can make the space as well. The clock is an iconic piece as well, and I think making everything black is not always the best move. Might be kind of 2022 trendy, but or it's kind of that design aesthetic that a lot of people much younger than me seem to prefer. But I still like the splashes of color, and I think people kind of like to see that in the downtown as well. I also prefer not having buildings on the current parking lots. I think keeping that as parking is that's personal preference, and I think it, based on what I've heard from people, I think it would be kind of a community preference as well. So those are kind of some of my main points. But I did want to this doesn't really come in this part of the agenda, and it's not really on the agenda, but maybe there's something that we can do to counteract some of the negativity that's been put out in the community about the whole project. I find that quite distasteful when you see that kind of, even people that have been involved in other processes that I've been involved in recently, like the focus group for the OCP. Some of those people were weighing in and being really negative about any change in Grizzly Plaza. So I find that alarming that there's that level of, so I think, any changes are going to be a little bit problematic, but I think if we're sensitive to that and sensitive to the nature of what the space was created for and the spirit in which it was created, I think that would be helpful. So those are just some of my first impressions seeing those two concepts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. And I agree. I thank you for bringing up the concept of the black versus the green. I think one of the things, Megan, I'm going to come to you next. But just before we do, I think one of the concepts that had come out when we were looking at the branding of Tourism Revelstoke is that the red and green are still prominent colors in the color scheme, and that keeping the green is not outside of moving into that branding. And I kind of agree with you, Kathy. I think it keeps that focus on the greenery and the planting in a lot of ways to me. I will also comment on the commentary. I'll be speaking to this again at the end of the meeting of what comes next and how people can engage. And I'll admit, hearing that some leaders in our community are commenting online without reaching out to me as the chair of this committee is also alarming, we'll say. I would like to put myself out there if anyone has any concerns, that I am always available to chat with and would happily discuss with them. And we can talk about that a little bit more later. But I would like to hear from Megan next, if we could, on just that perspective from tourism and the impact. I'm curious if I could just lead you a little bit, Megan, the impact of being able to visibly see the gazebo on that red dome from Victoria Road, because I imagine part of that visibility of the plaza from the main road going through town is part of the appeal. Amanda, if you could, please. For Megan Tapper.
Thanks. Sorry, the chat was disabled and the mute was also disabled. So thanks.
I think she's trying to help keep me from getting too distracted, but.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, can you repeat the last question you asked? Because I was just like trying to work the tech.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just a comment on one of the conversations, and especially hearing from Stacey and Maggie over at the Chamber of Commerce around keeping it very open at Victoria Road, so that I imagine part of it is that visibility of the gazebo from the road, so that travelers into our community do kind of stop and take a good look and can see this amazing space.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I would agree with like Kathy and Station regarding the elements in option 2 being closer to what the community is probably asking for. I think we would get a lot of pushback moving the gazebo, like almost just as much as removing it completely. To kind of talk about the color piece, I am in agreement that I think we could see like tasteful splashes of the brand color around Grizzly Plaza, but I would be weary of kind of dominantly painting everything that green, or like conversely dominantly painting everything the black as well, right? So I think if you take a look at our brand book, which I think Fraser obviously has and the city has, like our 2 dominant colors are the black and white with the splashes of the maroon, yellow, and green. So if we kind of kept that theme throughout Grizzly Plaza, that could look nice. And it could kind of bring some color splashes to that area without going like really far off brand. And then I guess I kind of just have some general comments on both of them. Sorry, Fraser, I know that's not what you're looking for, but I would say, yeah, like leaning towards option 1. I like most things in option 1. Option 2, my apologies. I think I have a couple questions, like that you can't really tell the size of population that we want to have comfortably be able to view that performance in Grizzly Plaza. Sometimes if you have a massive band, you can get upwards of like 500 people there. So there's not really like a natural gallery or area to like watch performers in either of the designs, I guess. And then the other comment around, I guess my other comment around option number 2 and the movable stage, I think it's a unique concept for sure. I just wonder if it'll get a little bit too busy in that having multiple structures. And I think there's another question around the orientation, like changing that to First Street. I understand from like a aesthetics perspective, but you kind of wonder about noise control for then people like staying at the Regent or staying at Explorer Society or even kind of in that First Street area. I think we'd want to direct the sound back into Grizzly Plaza versus having sound like accidentally filled First Street on both sides. So I guess like just like paying attention to properly funneling and controlling that performance space if that's the direction that we're going. And then I noticed that there weren't any of the kiosks were like completely removed from both designs, which I'm completely fine with. But I just was wondering if Fraser had ideas on kind of where to repurpose those, because I think there's value in the information in there. And then my last comment was around, had we fully decided on if the road was going to be open or closed, or is that still up for discussion? I know we had kind of talked about maybe there's a trial closure period or not, having, vehicle transport be just like buses and emergency vehicles rather than tourist local through traffic. Like, has that been fully decided on yet at this point? No. Okay.
No. And so if I could respond to a few of those, and Fraser, by all means, you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding. The road closure, we were talking about having the ability to close the road as trial experiments, and then also to be able to revert back to open to traffic, so that it would not be a permanent closure. We were not interested in any design that would be a permanent closure. It should still accommodate for traffic. For the kiosks, I'm not sure if there's any more comment on that, but I could see that being part of a larger conversation. I'm curious, and maybe, Fraser, if you'd like to answer some of those other comments. Amanda, if you could unmute Fraser as well, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So I'll start with the kiosks. There are kiosks in both concepts. There's only one. So I believe in option 2, it's up near the parking lot. And then in option 1, it's down on First Street. I may be just mislabeling it in the concepts, but they are both there. And I know there's a couple of things we need to add to, like, bike parking and things like that. Yeah. So we'll be sure to add that. I did want to point out that the kiosks are in both concepts. So we have made room for those. As far as the road closure, my understanding was that it wouldn't be closed permanently. It may be closed for a period longer than 2 hours a day. Like, it might be, like I said, a longer closure, or close it over Street Fest or something like that. But again, there needs to be an ability to kind of open it up to traffic should it be needed. It's part of the reason we have the bollards in there. Again, a bit of a limitation in terms of how the space works is just, Steve was saying you need to have bollards in there anytime the road is open. So, in some ways it gets in the way of the seating for Street Fest, but it's just a safety thing. And I'm guessing you could use some of the planters to do that, but then you run the risk of people slamming into the planters and having to fix that. So we've kind of just put the bollards in along the street at this point. just for safety.
Right.
It's a good comment about visualizing the space for a performance. So that's something we can map out for the final. Just, 500 people in the plaza at one time. How are they all fitting in? One of the things we did look at that is unfortunately not in the package was just how the market would work, because in terms of the continuity of that, it's a little bit disrupted with some of the more permanent planters. So we can show that as well. So we'll take that back just in terms of identifying that space for crowds and things like that. And I don't know if there were.
Thank you. That's great, actually, especially being able to visualize it is really challenging, especially as we address and explore some changes like this. Being able to visualize some of our favorite events in that space would be super helpful. So thank you. I'm curious as to your thoughts on this comment around mixing colors of the black and green rather than having it all black or all green. Is that something that you guys had discussed at all, or initial thoughts at least?
Can I just jump in on the road closures before we
please do, Jason. Thank you.
I think the existing bollards are beautiful, and I think they're a real asset that we want to continue with. So I think really all it is converting a few of those to removable bollards so that the street can be closed and opened basically at will. Once we have kind of a preferred direction to move forward, I think we'll really look at where the bollards are placed. Obviously, there's a bit of a protection required when the street's open, but I do think that we can take a hard look at trying to open that space up and use bollards really, really strategically while maintaining that historic look. So I think it's awesome that they're in such good condition and that we can kind of give them a refresh and have removable bollards moving forward. And I think it's going to create a nice space that we'll really look at free flowing. And once we move forward with the preferred concept, I think we can model, what the market might look like, or what, say, 200 people in the space watching a band might look like, or something like that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Jason.
And then in terms of the mixing and matching colors, I'm a bit of a stickler for kind of picking a direction and going with it. I'm partial to kind of, wrought iron and ornate things being black, but that's just my aesthetic. I think we would want to just either they're black or green, and we just go with that. And that's not to say that we couldn't introduce some other splashes of color on different elements. I'm all for that, but I don't think we'd want to have, green lights and black something else. And I think we'd kind of pick, the materials, the wrought iron, the ornate kind of ornamental aspect to it. We pick a direction, and we kind of all of the metal is going to be the same color. So whether it's the green or the black, I wouldn't recommend we mix and match a whole bunch.
That wasn't my recommendation. Yeah. My recommendation was to pick a predominant color, like our brand colors being black and white, and then allowing other opportunities for splashes of color. It doesn't have to be, Thank
you for clarifying that. That was definitely my misunderstanding and misrepresentation, but thank you. I appreciate being able to have that conversation. Steve, you have a comment.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. The question on whether the road surface is going to be at grade or whether it would be recessed as it is today, I think needs to be given some thought. And I'd also like to hear what Scott Pass, as our transit operator, has to say about, as everybody's aware, we are looking to integrate the Mountain Shuttle and the BC Transit to one system. And is Grizzly Plaza going to remain our exchange area, or does that get moved to? And so I think it's important that BC Transit has a say in some of these concepts as to how we complete this process.
Absolutely. So yeah, we'll go to Scott next, and then afterwards I'll be coming to you, Carol, for a comment on the performance side of the space. So Scott, please. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. So I'll qualify my comments with the caveat that I'm an operations guy. I'm not much of a visionary. So ultimately about efficiency and that sort of thing. The concepts looks absolutely beautiful, and I think they're great. And I think Jason's comments about the bollards being removable kind of opened up a consideration that I hadn't thought of before.
Okay.
To Steve's point about, we want to grow the transit system. We want to consolidate the resort shuttle and the transit system. We want to grow the system and make it much more, have the ridership of the transit system be the same as the ridership of the resort shuttle. For the transit system to be successful in the medium and long term, it's absolutely critical that we have a downtown exchange. And the exchange doesn't necessarily have to be right at Grizzly Plaza, but it needs to be very close to Grizzly Plaza. Anytime that people try to do exchanges, too much off to the side, it just becomes unworkable, and then people don't use the transit systems. So, we need a spot where we can park buses for slightly extended periods of time. So it's a central exchange. That's where people, the main driver on and off the bus, that's where buses wait. That's where transfers take place. And, for that to be successful, the buses have to be able to, they have to be able to wait there for a short period of time. And they also have to be able to pass by one another. It can't just be, lined up. There might be one bus that's parked and another one needs to go around it. Somewhere people were suggesting that there's the possibility of moving the exchange to First. One of the things that we've talked about is improving the service along First. I think that's absolutely a great idea, and I think there'd be huge benefits to the transit system about having improving the service along First. But First is pretty narrow. So, the space between the buildings, the sidewalk, the roadway, and then the buildings on the other side, the opportunities for an exchange on First, I have trouble visualizing it right now. So, right now, Grizzly Plaza is an absolute ideal location for the transit exchange. As I said, I'm not good at visualizing where it could be moved, but we do need an exchange, within a short distance. I absolutely support, temporarily closing the exchange. So if it's, a farmer's market on Sunday or a concert in the evening, that's absolutely not a problem at all. But ultimately, we need to make sure that we have a main exchange that is there most of the time. Sorry, someone's calling me and I'm trying to ignore them. I'm just checking my notes to see if I said it. The one thing, just throwing out ideas, when Fraser was talking about the possibility of there being buildings at the existing parking lots. So maybe if buildings are being considered, I know that, we'd start a war as far as taking away the parking, but if buildings are being considered there, maybe that's an opportunity to move the exchange there. Based on what I've heard so far, if it's possible to have Grizzly maintain, move us over temporarily, absolutely open to that, or any other option that has an exchange nearby. But it's just finishing my thoughts. We have an anti-idling policy, and we really enforce the drivers to keep the buses idling to a minimum. But say, for instance, if we did have buses parked on First, there are going to be buses, starting up, stopping down, idling for 1 or 2 minutes before they go. There's not a lot of room there. So if we have a business or a restaurant and then the sidewalk and then the parking right there, there's not a lot of room. So people are going to be impacted by the noise and the exhaust fumes. But if we move to electric buses, then there won't be any exhaust. I think that's everything I have right now.
All right.
I hope that helps and doesn't hinder.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Any follow-up, Fraser or Jason, while we have Scott here?
No, other than asking where the ideal location would be that's perhaps not in the plaza. I think for me, I think where it's shown on First, it is against the sidewalk, but it's a building that's kind of elevated, the old Molson building, I think it is. And so there's not a lot of people hanging out there per se. But yeah, I'd love some other options to explore. And
Well, and I think, and Mr. Black, you might have some comment on this. Our master transportation plan is going into phase 2. I believe yesterday was part of the online input that unfortunately I missed, but there are still some in-person opportunities. And that conversation might better belong in that discussion. But I know one of the thoughts that I'd had around that, just because I did grow up in Winnipeg, is starting to consider more one-way streets so that those narrower roads can handle a little bit more the passing of traffic and maybe making it a bit more functional. But your comments about the exhaust and the sound outside of businesses really makes me second guess that. But again, that might be beyond the scope. Since we're trying to keep this conversation just to the Grizzly Plaza, I might suggest we refer that to the master transportation plan discussion for further consideration. And unless anyone has any follow-up, we can move on to Ms. Carol Palladino, please, to talk about performance space and functionality.
Thanks, Nicole. I guess just general comments, I think echo a lot of actually Kathy's thinking in terms of concept too. I think people just being able to look in the plaza and sort of see the band shell where it's always been, I think will, that bit of familiarity amongst the change might be helpful, just in terms of people embracing changes or enhancements. And also just, I really like how lush and green and inviting the concepts, both of them feel like the extra greenery, both concepts sort of are meeting that idea of that it's a park-like space and maybe not so much a commercial space. And I having that sort of green center to the heart of town may resonate really nicely over time, both with residents and visitors. Specific to the performance space, that's a really sort of unique idea. I think with Megan as well, just it's not just about performance. I mean, yes, there's everybody says sort of the Summer Street Festival, and yes, that's like 65 nights of music, and so having a dedicated space for that, I think is a great idea. I don't know that I love, and I know Fraser said, like, don't get hung up on exactly what the top looks like, and that's fine. But this idea of a space on rails that could move back and forth. But I think in the future, like some of the goals of tourism around hosting some events where there might be awards or there might be presentations that you'd want to hold outside, that space would serve that as well. So that, I don't know about how it looks on the top, but I certainly think the idea of this movable platform that could be used, one, to signal that the street's closed, as well as create that really good space where, again, if the band is facing into the plaza and the audience is actually looking into town as opposed to out of town, I think just will changes the dynamics considerably. But I think that's a really neat creative idea. And the things like thinking about snow, would it be usable in winter? Because I think if it's going to be a good space, it should be usable whenever we need it for whether it's performance or presentation, to be able to use it all year around. And how making that really easy for, city guys, city folks to move it in and out, which makes me wonder about the covering, or would it be collapsible, or does it make sense to, for summer or whatever, that that's a completely separate thing. I don't know, but I do think it's a really clever way to sort of serve that overall purpose of creating that kind of space and then having it movable. So I certainly lean to concept too, and the greenery, leaving the gazebo where it is, because that just still feels familiar and sort of echoes back to sort of the beginnings of the space as well. So that's my comments.
Great, thank you, Carol. I appreciate that. And just you speaking about the usability of it in the summer and the winter, I know when I first saw it, I thought wow, how great would it be to have a covered space to enjoy your lunch? Because I saw the seating on it when it wasn't in use as a stage. That would be fantastic. But then the idea of trying to move it in the winter with a snow load on top is also an interesting concept. But that's why we bring in designers and smarter people than me.
I think,
to
Nicole, just to jump in, I'll
Yeah.
echo that. When I did see that concept of when it was sort of separate, that it did create another little sort of covered space. So I think the finished design, if it's covered, and I'm not an acoustic person, but it is an outdoor thing. But that idea that it might create that sort of slightly out of the weather place for people, rain or shine, is kind of a neat idea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, next I'm going to go to Melissa Jameson, if I could, to talk about accessibility concerns and how well we've hit the mark with this. And then I'd like to ask Christy to speak afterwards around the family experience.
Yeah, okay. I've been writing a lot of notes while we're taking this meeting. It's been really nice to see a lot of the accessibility concepts and designs incorporated into the proposals. I think my personal viewpoint is that I think that option 2 is I like that option. I think it's the best option. It's really great to see the accessibility ramp for the existing gazebo. And I think that's great, not just from like a mobility standpoint, but also for user groups to be able to, move equipment up and down. I did have a question in terms of the second design or the second concept in terms of the sort of movable structure, if that was accessible as well. And then I had another question in terms of just recognizing that, that there's different types of accessibility needs. And I think we've talked and covered a lot on like mobility related accessibility needs, but there's also different types of disabilities, including a lot of visual disabilities. And so I'm just wondering what is being done in terms of the signage and different written materials that might be part of the new plaza design to make them accessible.
Great. Yeah, great comments. Yeah, I think Jason just wanted us to mention that I'll start off by mentioning that the ramp to the gazebo, again, more of a concept. It might be curved, it might, look sort of different, but we're happy.
With the circular nature of the gazebo, I really want to curve the ramp around one side. So I think the straight ramp actually would get in the way quite a bit. So Fraser, you're correct. I was unmuting myself to say that. I think depending on, unless there was some drastic motion to, change the gazebo big time, I think a more rounded ramp up to the kind of meat gathering space makes a lot of sense, and will take up less room, and it could, with some planting and things like that, it could actually become quite a cool space that you could sit beside the ramp, and there could be some planting, and then you could go right up to the meeting area or the performance space. So
yeah, and as far as the kind of movable stage, again, that's why we have you on the committee. So not something we're thinking about when we put it together, but definitely something we can include in the final. And same goes for, other types of accessibility needs. So, in terms of signage, or if, like I've seen, paving options for people with visual impairment that kind of help them navigate through the plaza. So those are something we will think about a bit more closely for the final concept.
Yeah, Melissa,
as far as
Melissa, one thing I've used is kind of tactile warning strips on crossings and things like that, so that there's a clear indicator that you're crossing a street or something like that. Is that Is that helpful? Do
I
you
think that is helpful. I think I was more talking, I probably wasn't clear on this, but more, you know, like the kiosks, the information kiosks, is that making sure that the information presented on those kiosks is done in a way that is accessible for people that might have some kind of visual impairment.
Right. And if I could follow up on the kiosk conversation, because it's come up a few times. The kiosks, if I understand correctly, are managed by Tourism Revelstoke and the Chamber of Commerce in partnership with the city just for space, I believe. And so in my understanding of it would be opening the door for tourism to have as part of the wayfinding strategy or that information strategy, part of visitor information, and just leaving that in the wheelhouse of tourism to manage and tell that story in an accessible way that's cohesive throughout the city, rather than focusing too much on it here in the Grizzly Plaza conversation. Does that seem like?
That seems good, and I agree. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention too, that also probably falls outside of the scope of this project, but is an accessibility piece I think we need to consider, is looking at the relocation of the downtown bus exchange and the impact that has on accessibility of people wanting to access Grizzly Plaza.
Right. And I think that speaks to what Scott was saying about keeping it very close, that is key. Absolutely. Thank you. Megan, do you have any feedback or comments after on the kiosk?
Yeah, like I would just agree that it's a tourism managed project with city. The infrastructure is city, so the city owns the kiosks and we put the information in it. So Melissa, maybe we want to connect offline, we can chat about how we can make that information more accessible.
That'd be great. Yeah,
that would be great. And I think with the designs offering options for kiosks at both entries to Grizzly Plaza, whatever strategy that the Tourism Revelstoke thinks fits best within that broader scale of the city, I think we'd be more than happy to accommodate. So we can happily leave that in your wheelhouse. So Christy, let's talk about families. If we can get Christy unmuted.
Hi. I'm here. Yeah, I kind of agree with the majority. Definitely with Kathy and Stacy. I like concept 2's idea. With the bollards being in place, I think it just gives that visual reminder for especially kids that might be bolting and darting, that there's kind of some limits put in. Same with the fence being removed and the planters put along like by where the food trucks are there, with the trench. Again, that kind of provides a more aesthetically pleasing barrier to remind them of, the parking lots and stuff going on. I like the accessibility part to the gazebo. My first idea was a curved ramp going up. I think it's good for all. The stage, the moving pieces of the stage, I like the idea of a covered space for seating for an option. Am I sold on the whole idea of the stage concept? I'm not sure, but I do like when it's separated, the two areas for seating, so that families can come take a break out of the shade. You've got a screaming toddler, you can have some shade. I really like the integrated benches and seating within the planters. I think it kind of gives like a cozy little feeling that people can have their space kind of away from it. Overall, I like concept 2, and I agree with what everyone is pretty much saying about it. So
great. And I'm curious if I could ask you, Christy, one of the things that I can't help but worry about with black bollards is the heat. And I don't know if there'd be a huge difference in heat on those bollards between the black and the green, because the green's also quite dark. If you have any comment on that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a bit warmer. My preference is still keeping them green. I think it looks, to me, from my opinion. I'm not sure how much more heat would be retained for the black versus the green, but I think
they figure that out. We've all figured that out eventually, though, right?
Yeah, it's whether it's that or the handle going up to the gazebo, or like even the benches themselves get pretty hot. So that's why the shade and stuff. So
absolutely, fair enough. Thank you, Carol. I see you have your hand up. If you have any further feedback on some of the comments that have been made. If we could unmute Carol, and then we'll be moving towards Melissa Hemphill, I believe is.
Yeah,
somewhere
I just wanted to jump in to say that pre-COVID, the average audience size for Street Fest was 300. That's the average, which tells me that depending on the band, you could have 500 to 800 people with a sort of bigger name. So I just for in terms of that planning in the comments about how what that audience might look like or where they might fit, 300 a night is a really regular size audience.
Great, thank you for that perspective.
Thanks.
It sounds like Melissa Hemphill had to leave us early, and I feel terrible I didn't give her a chance to speak while she was here. But I know Mark McKee, if you have some insight to share with us, if we can get Mark, thank you.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, I made a few notes, and I agree with a lot of the things that people have been saying, and I'm probably looking more to in favor of option number 2, which would basically leave the band shell where it is. There's some things that I like about some of the new ideas and the concepts, but going to Carol's point, a few others, I think that it's important that the front of the band shell have a big open space, and because for the gatherings of people, whether it's for music or if it's other community events that happen, so we need that audience space that can connect to the band shell. The 2-part band shell, I think it's a really a cool idea, and it's a cool look. I just don't think that it's for the plaza. I think it really belongs as a one-piece band shell in something like QE Park, which is a whole different idea than what we're talking. I don't think that it's going to be too busy down there with the band shell, with 2 band shells, really. So I think it should just be booted out. I like the entrances, how they're opening up from the parking lots and the food trucks. When we were touring the downtown, down to the plaza, I had mentioned about the wraparound handicap access to the band shell, and I think that is really the way to go. I think it's going to look a lot better aesthetically. It'll integrate in, and it matches the shape of the band shell as well. I'm glad to see that the existing water line can be abandoned. That was actually my first comment, is that why can't that water line be abandoned? So I was glad to hear that. I think the infill buildings, I don't think are something that we should be contemplating in the next little while, because I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that I think it'll close off the visual of the plaza for the people that are traveling through. It'll close it in too much. People may not notice the plaza as much, the people that are traveling through. I don't think that it's totally necessary yet. I think it's going to be a huge expense. I don't think that the community is going to find it acceptable. And the other thing is that the plaza, in my mind, is this real icon of the community. And what is the plaza going to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30, 50 years? How do we expand the plaza? And especially if we do infill buildings, we're really handcuffing ourselves to expanding that area. And so I think that we really should be thinking about that. I got a couple of the notes here. So, we talk about option 1 and option 2, but I think one of the things that every committee should be thinking about is the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th option, which is do nothing or do the bare minimum. And I'm kind of leaning towards that. I think that the plaza needs to be cleaned up. It needs some maintenance. I like the flattening of the road. I don't know about these removing the bollards or even having them movable. I think that's part of the plaza. And is it really necessary to spend the money on something like that? We started this process because we had some people apply for a grant, and we got some money. But I think that the committee and I know council will have to look at it, all these wish lists that are being thrown about, how much money are we talking about? And you know, I think it's going to be scary when we say, okay, this is our final concept, and then we go out for engineering and costing, and you know, I without having a finalized concept in front of me, but you know, I could see us talking, you know, possibly millions and millions of dollars, and you know, I don't think that that's acceptable to the community. We should do a refresh. We should do a cleanup. We should look at how we can do things fast and easy and cheap to make it better and more accessible. And I think that that's what the community would be expecting. And so I think we just need to pull the reins back a little bit. And there are some good ideas. The new planter ideas are good. But really, what do we need? We need the plaza cleaned up. And it's doing a great job. Let's not reinvent the wheel when the wheel's still turning.
Fair enough. And I appreciate you saying that, Mark. I think that doing nothing is always an option. I agree. We don't have to do any of this. And getting to the dollars and cents of what these different options would cost is part of that next part of the process. I think it was important, and this is something I felt pretty strongly about, is that it's important to look at the ideas from all of our perspectives in a way that we don't ignore an easy fix that might be a minor change, or just leaving the door open for future upgrades in future years while we start with some basic upgrades and some changes. No, we don't have either of our farmer market representatives here. Melissa was here for the presentation, so I'm looking forward to hearing her comments. And I would encourage everyone here, both in the steering committee, but also as members of the public, and I will be making sure that this gets out to the public, that if there are any further comments or concerns, that we are all ears. And I would love to discuss it with anyone who'd like to talk in person, or they are welcome to submit their comments. Fraser and Jason, I would like to put a time frame on any comments from the public that might be submitted. And I was wondering what kind of a timeline that you were thinking of, because I know we have the terms of reference for this committee, we're finishing at the end of June. So we are hoping to have a final concept. Again, these are not the design details. This is just the concept of the design by the end of the month. My thought was to give people possibly until the 20th. That might be too long, but it would be nice to give them at least a weekend. So by next Monday, but it's your work and I don't want to put any unnecessary burdens on you as well. So if there's any ideas for timelines of that, just to receive those written comments from other people's, and especially if people have questions for us, and I am able to speak with some more people to get that comments to you in a functional way.
Yeah, I'd say that the 20th might be challenging to get all the comments and redo the design. So, you know, I would say
and to clarify, I wouldn't expect any redesign of anything, but just that further weight on anything. Like, for example, one of the conversations we hadn't really touched on, but I think came through loud and clear, was the heritage style versus the modern style. We talked more about the lamps, I believe, but there was also the bench options that you had there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can take those comments now. We've got a bit of time, or, you know, you can throw a poll out if you want. That might be a quick way to do it. Okay. Or we can just take comments by email. Yeah, we're flexible that way.
Yeah, because they can come through myself and staff, so we can summarize in a report to make it simpler. And I'm happy to bump it up to the 13th, for example. So next, like by Monday, to have any comments or anything else further back. So for, especially from the farmers markets that we're commenting.
Yeah, I think Jason wants to chime in as well.
Please do.
Yeah, I think as long as we don't have to sit on our hands and wait until all the comments come through, I think, you know, I'm on Facebook, I'm reading some of the comments and things like that on the Revel. Okay. I think we have a pretty good sense that people are pretty attached to the plaza and the way it is. So the direction to, really finesse it and make it function a lot better, but not drastically change it is something that, I don't expect that to change from now until the time. So I don't know how you feel about it, Fraser, but I feel like we're getting pretty clear direction and we can move forward, and people can definitely, like, we want to hear from everybody. And if there was something that came in that really, made us take a step back that we haven't thought of yet or something like that, we could probably bring it up with the group. But I think like the direction is pretty obvious, and I think we can move ahead while we're still taking people's input. It's important for everybody to be able to be heard and to give their 2 cents on it. But I think the direction's pretty clear from what I've absorbed from the process so far. So yeah.
Well, that makes me feel better about having a strong steering committee that does have good representation from our community. And I hope that we've been able to cover a wide gamut of perspectives so that we can provide some great feedback to some really great ideas here. So thank you for bringing them all forward to us. I believe we've gone through everyone here. And if anyone has any final comments, otherwise, we've been going for almost an hour and a half, so I'd also be happy to entertain wrapping us up. Mr. Black or your worship, Gary, if you would have any comments to add to our discussion so far?
The mayor took off for another meeting.
Okay, perfect.
He was very happy with the discussion today, and I think from a staff perspective, I think we've got some good ideas on how to move forward also. Thank you.
Wonderful. So then when would we expect to be scheduling I expect a final meeting, or do we feel, do you think there might be a need for anything beyond that? I mean, the final decision does rest with council, but I want to make sure that this committee is able to provide some really good guidance to council based on these discussions.
I think for us, what would be helpful, because I can envision another 2 concepts now, which I'm a bit hesitant to commit to, but one is just like leaving the planters exactly as is, kind of with the curve and stuff. And the other is to, look at replacing those so they are a bit more functional, like concept 2, and getting some comments on that. And then, I mean, maybe the last meeting is just choosing the preferred of those 2 rather than us going back and then doing a whole other option. Like, I think, as Jason said, we've got some pretty good direction, and one is like kind of bare minimum. And the other is closer to option 2. And I think we are going to put like a cost estimate together, high level. But again, just, to touch on some of the cost things, like, I think what that does is it lets council say, we like the movable stage, but the reality of it is not practical, or it's something we're going to budget for in 5 to 10 years, at least with, a rough idea of something like that. I think that's helpful. So I don't know how you feel about that. If we just kind of touched up existing and then came back with a refined concept 2 as the alternative, and then the committee can say, yes, we like that.
I think that sounds wonderful, especially with the idea, because I know I was speaking with Mr. Black a little bit earlier about this idea of what would phasing look like. Would it be like what we could do now and what we could hold space for in the future? One of the topics in our OCP that's up for final steps right now is the idea of a cultural plan. And what do events look like in Revelstoke over the next 20 years? So starting to take that longer view. of what spaces do we need and what else will we have available to us. So this all does tie into those other discussions as well, including the transit. So that having those two options sounds like a great idea for a final meeting. I'm seeing a lot of nods in the group. So if there are any other concerns or questions, again, I am very available. I am away for another week, but you can reach me by my email. Amanda put the feedback email into the chat. It is also available on Talk Revelstoke for people to access quite easily. And I would encourage anyone that you're speaking to that might have some concerns, they're more than welcome to speak to me directly or submit comment. We would like to hear from them so that we can address any glaring concerns that might be coming out. And I am grateful to have an option to look at what would it look like to just do some minimal touch-ups to the space so that we can discuss that as a team. So with that said, I will call for adjournment. If I can get a mover and a seconder.
Sorry, before
Yeah.
we go, can we get some direction on just the aesthetic of it in terms of new bench versus old bench, new light versus old light, those kinds of things?
Absolutely. So maybe since I can see everyone now, to keep this brief so we can all move on with our days. Since we did not prepare polls virtually, but if I could just get from a show of hands, if we start with the bench, heritage versus modern. So first, who would vote for the heritage bench in the space? 1, 2, 3, and myself for 4. And who would prefer the modern? 1, 2 of those present. Okay, so a slight trend towards the heritage. I know for myself, it more has to do with it looks more comfortable, but the modern ones look beautiful, but they do look a little less comfortable to sit on. I'm seeing nods from Carol.
Just to clarify, any bench that we select or design is going to be comfortable. I would never put a bench anywhere that isn't comfortable. So.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, if comfort was not an issue, Carol, would you go modern or heritage? No, still heritage. Okay. All right. I think I might be more open to the modern if I knew it was a good, comfortable bench to sit on. So I don't know if that's kind of an even split there on the benches. That would be an interesting one to discuss with parks as like a grand bench scheme almost to have it match the rest of the community, to bring that question forward to the community as part of a different discussion almost. Anyways, the light fixtures, the light poles. Again, starting with heritage versus modern. So those who prefer heritage. That looks like a clear answer. And those who would like the modern. Megan. Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. I appreciate your boldness in saying that because it's a tough thing, especially when things are getting rowdy in the community. But they are beautiful. I just think that I will let that stand as the committee commented. So does that give you the feedback you were looking for, Fraser? Was there another comment that you were wondering about?
No, I don't.
I think the elements kind of relate to each other. So we probably wouldn't go, modern light fixture, heritage bench. So I think it's great that there's support for both kind of directions. That means, we've done our job and put forward some good options. But yeah, I think overwhelmingly it seemed like with the lights, it's using the existing light poles and then putting new fixtures on it. So I think the benches, we would probably want them to relate to the site furnishings and the bollards and the light poles and things like that. So to me, that's we just want consistency. We don't want the benches to be a huge departure from everything else.
Wonderful. Thank you. But thank you for bringing them forward as well for discussion because they are really quite beautiful. All right. So not seeing any other comments. I will hold a moment. Then I will call for adjournment, please. If I could have a mover and a seconder. Carol and Melissa Jameson. And thank you very much, everyone, for your time today. I appreciate it. I appreciate that we went a little bit long, but I think it was a really great discussion. And again, if anyone who has been viewing this meeting or that you speak with later would like to follow up, please do reach out to me.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.